Happy New Year, everybody. The beginning of a year always fills us with a certain amount of optimism and expectation. We always want this year to be somewhat better than last year. As an astrologer, I have people coming every year saying, I want you to tell me that this year is going to be better than last year. And of course, the whole idea of a year is a little bit artificial in the first place. And we're really just talking about a calendar when we talk about how we define the year from January to December. But that calendar makes all the difference in the world to us. So tonight we are going to be looking at what's ahead for the year 2018. Everyone is dying to know what's going on this year, and is it going to be a better year than last year, calendar or none? We all know there are major developments happening on the South African political scene, and of course that does make for a lot of different ingredients and possibilities and contingencies that an astrologer has to deal with. I want to just tell you quickly a little bit about what astrology really does when we look at what the year ahead is and what astrology is really capable of when looking at that. Astrology is fundamentally about people, and it is an early science that is really about understanding how human beings and their own cycles and their own patterns relate to the greater human experience, the greater cosmic experience, and so on. Astrology is not a psychic art. It doesn't involve some mysterious talent where astrologers, like crystal ball readers, can see things which present themselves to the astrologer or which are perceived in that way by the astrologer. And I say this because astrologers get asked all sorts of questions about all sorts of things. One of the most obvious right now is, what about the drought in Cape Town? What's going to happen? Well, like I said, astrologers are really using a tool that's all about people. And although there are branches of astrology that deal with the earth and deal with the weather in particular, that is not a common or major branch of astrology today. And strictly speaking, there's just about nothing that could be said about the drought. Astrology is limited. It does not claim to have access to all information. So I'm telling you right off the bat, drought, weather, climate, not something we can really talk about with astrology, unfortunately. Even if we were to talk about what are the effects on Cape Town, problem is Cape Town's a very old city without an establishment date. It's been through so many different things, and how would we define that? What's Cape Town? What's the Western Cape? All of those things, they're just not about the human that we're worrying about over there. So for the sake of clarity, we're going to keep the drought out of our astrology, and I think there are lots of practical, real-life predictions and strategies that are very helpful to stick to with regards all of that. But politics is most certainly all about people, and especially when you have a situation like we do where strong, powerful leaders strongly affect the political scene. So we'll be talking a lot about that as well. In 2018 now, South Africa has entered the early stages of adulthood, the first part of its maturity. Some things about countries' patterns resemble human patterns, and that is, after about the age of 21 and 22, we increasingly reject the influence of the parents and the elders, and we start trying to find our own way and our own identity and all of those things that make up early adulthood. It's an unstable time, but an exciting time, and it's a time where, with some time, we'll come to a more solid and powerful definition of who we are. So the overall broad picture for South Africa is increasingly that. Since the last national election in 2014, we've shifted much more into our majority. And now we're ready to start looking at what is the shape of the more adult South Africa that is gradually emerging over the course of the next few years. What that means in practical terms is that there will be increasing shifts in the political landscape amongst all the major political parties. All the major political parties, especially the ANC and the DA, essentially still are inherited from part of the history of South Africa. In some ways, they are both very much part of the old South Africa, even though they both only found their wings in the new South Africa. But nevertheless, in terms of who they are, in terms of who's in them and what they do, they still are the adults that South Africa is gradually beginning to break away from. So there will be shifts in the political landscape all over the place, a lot of changes in the ANC and the DA, a lot of leadership issues in both of those parties. As we know, there have been changes in the ANC leadership. Everyone's wondering what's going to happen to President Jacob Zuma. Those changes are still due, and of course there is a strong likelihood of a recall of Jacob Zuma during the course of this year. As we look at the quarters of the year, you'll see when that is the most likely. What also signifies a shift from the adults to the growing young adults of the country is increasing noise from the grassroots level. One of the things that South Africans know, and what really helped change this country probably more than anything, were the actions of grassroots organizations and people organizing themselves. While that is increasingly a worldwide movement we are seeing, in South Africa it's becoming especially relevant, and with the issues related to land, the issues related to fees, and even the issues related to the compromises that were made in the 1993 negotiations leading to the new South Africa, all of these voices are going to be rising again. And in 2018, we are going to see the government attempting to listen to the people, or perhaps in a somewhat populist manner, attempting to draw in those ideas and co-opt them for themselves and feed them back to the people. But as we see on a worldwide scale, there is a shift away from people just accepting what is told to them by authority. And for us here in South Africa, that shift can turn out to be quite significant after the next general election. That's 2019, and we're going to be talking about that in about a year's time. But the rumblings are here in 2018, where we can see ways that the landscape changes at grassroots level, so that ordinary people such as ourselves and grassroots organizations don't feel spoken to in a top-down kind of way. We're kind of looking for ways to take back power for ourselves. It might be helpful that the economic situation will continue to fluctuate, but in many ways will show signs of positivity and some recovery. It's going to still be an expensive year for everyone. People are still going to find themselves at the personal level struggling a lot with money. But on the whole, economically, the rand, the exchange, those things are going to perform better than many expect and stay strong. We need to have a look at the 4 quarters of the year in more detail to see when things are really playing themselves out. As optimistic as we are at this time of the year, there is a lot of confusion, not the least of which is caused by the practical circumstances, as we know, of having just had their elective conference, the ANC birthday party, all showing no signs of real change in the party itself, and looking at the State of the Nation address in the next 10 days or so. So all of that has left South Africans feeling a little bit hanging in the air. And the first quarter of the year is all about that confusion. Will it happen? Won't it happen? What just happened there? Something looks like it's going to happen and nothing happened. Lots of mixed messages going out, lots of idealism and expectation, but lots of confusion and not very much happening in response to that expectation. The ANC is looking vulnerable, and especially after the State of the Nation address. After the State of the Nation's address, then we're going to see some movement beginning with the women's movement and other members of the ANC beginning to make their voices clearer about changes that need to be happening and which haven't really been seen since the elective conference they've been spoken about, but they haven't really been seen. And that remains true for the state of capture investigation, and we had a lot of pronouncement about it, but no action around it. Action that has been taken against corruption, against the Guptas and their organizations, all of that continues to remain quite low level or away from the public eye. We now know, or that they claim, that they were working very hard, the National Prosecuting Authority, behind the scenes. It's going to be more or less the same in the first quarter of this year. We'll see a little bit more of it. But basically the issue is things are just not clear. And in the midst of that, we will also see the president attempt to actually reassert his authority, just to kind of let us all know he's still running the show. It could be a still bit of an unexpected action by him in order to do that. But he is actually much weaker, astrologically speaking, and we might actually not hear very much from him at all. The same is really true for the opposition, especially the DA, very weak at the moment, and they're looking like they've got a lot of enemies, not only within and amongst themselves, but outside of themselves, that are causing a lot of trouble. The effects of the crisis in Cape Town with Patricia de Lille, the mayor, and the water crisis and all of that, is affecting the party on a much larger scale than just the Western Cape. There's lots of infighting and backstabbing going on, and really in so many ways the charts for the DA look so similar to the charts of the ANC at the moment that I wouldn't be surprised at all if some similar fate went parallel for those two parties. Not so much splitting for the DA, but certainly having a major crisis of leadership and a major loss of support, just like the ANC as well. The leader of that party, Mmusi Maimane, looks very blocked and frustrated and even powerless, or feelings of powerlessness. We're not seeing very strong action from him. The chart shows him vague, confused, probably being deceived or not understanding something or being idealistic about something, and that's preventing good, strong action from him. So a weak DA at a time when there's a weak ANC, not very good for anyone, and actually allows the status quo to bumble along for the first quarter of this year. The difference is with, of course, Julius Malema, who will use this opportunity to start articulating some policies that show how different he is from the ANC. ANC have tried to take hold of a lot of EFF policies of late, so Malema is going to start drawing the lines and emphasizing what's different about them. In the second quarter, we can see that that has not been quite as effective as Malema might have hoped or expected, and we can also see them as a political party feeling more stuck, except that we can also see a lot more violent action or frustrated action from them. In recent times, they've been all over the news for smashing clothing stores. That kind of behavior, or perhaps by the middle of the year, looks like the usual excitement in politics. That's probably where we're going to see it from them. But it looks like EFF in a fighting mood, also because they're frustrated that they're not really making the kind of progress they would like to. But still, for the government and for the ANC, the middle of the year is leading towards a crunch time, and that will be beneficial to the parties. The whole lead up to the middle of the year is confused, a lot of infighting and a lot of a vulnerable period for the ANC and for the President Jacob Zuma. Astrologically, the most likely time for the recall of Jacob Zuma is April, but for national charts like this, we look at the whole quarter, so I'd really say that, of course, that's April through June. In April, Zuma's chart is very challenged. In June, Zuma as head of state's chart is very challenged, as is the state itself. Looks like a dangerous and vulnerable time. June actually looks like when there's legal action taking place. It could be court cases against President Zuma, who might at that point be former President Zuma, that are starting to show. Whatever happens, even if he makes a deal to get out of court cases with the ANC, he's still likely to face it from unexpected sources amongst the people themselves who will take it upon themselves to try and bring justice. Remember, we're seeing a lot of rise of grassroots movements. We've seen this elsewhere in the legal system, that when the state fails to act, sometimes individuals and organizations find a way to do it themselves. For Jacob Zuma, there is no way out of it, and it looks like June is a crunch. So April could be recalled, June could be recalled, somewhere around there is probably it. This could also be the inquiry into the state capture, and that could be happening around June. I'd love to say this is when we're starting to see results come out of that. They have a 6-month mandate, but as we know, of course, they haven't really started getting going. Worst case scenario, that might only start getting going by April and at the very latest June. That's if Zuma manages to drag his heels, not get recalled and delay it that long. Not really that likely for all of that. The ruling party is making strategic changes in an effort to change their image. That is Ramaphosa's main task this year. It's about image change more than actual change. The delicate balancing act he's walking, trying to make the ANC look bigger and look better, and especially imply for the future, while not undermining and changing too much at present, because there is just too much that's unpredictable for him. Despite all of that, the financial situation is looking quite strong. There's still signs that the currency is performing better than expected. That's true a lot of this year. And that the economy in general is performing better than expected. That can lead to optimism. And that can also be despite the fact that it looks like in the mid-period of the year there are developments with regards to the ANC's policy on land redistribution. There's greater clarity from that, and there's probably a better reaction than people at this stage would expect to those kinds of changes. The ANC is also trying to change its image with regards to women and women in power, and we'll see more of that in the following quarter as well. The issue they really have to deal with in the second quarter is Zuma, the law, the courts, and the state of capture. So second quarter is really crunch time for the ANC, and that's where there's some possibility of split and some possibility of recall. As is typical in the pattern of national cycles in astrology, the third quarter carries on with many of the same themes, still looking very challenging to President Zuma, if indeed he is still the president at that point. If he is, and of course even if he isn't, this is the time when we see a lot of cabinet change. So maybe that's also why, if it hasn't been April, it's June, July, that we can see a lot of shift in the actual government, whether it's the president or more likely at the very least the cabinet that's changing at this time. And because of the raising of women's issues, there are two sides that are going on. On the one hand, the ANC Women's League is trying to re-establish relevance and meaning and representation after their dismal failure to represent women in 2017. So they're trying to regain that relevance, and they're also split because part of how they would have to do that is to accept some of the changes that need to happen in cabinet with regards to women in power, and which actually show in the charts as well. The ANC, facing a challenge of not having enough women in government, still have the challenge of getting rid of the 3 women causing all the trouble in the government, and of course that's Bata Bile Dlamini, that's Faith Mutambi, that's Lynn Brown. So it does look like their jobs in government don't last beyond about the middle of the year, July or something like that. But as I say, it's part of a struggle that's happening with the Women's League itself and their efforts to make themselves more relevant. And they may still actually achieve something in that regard as well. These June and July are also critical times for the DA. We have the issues that are arising in February for them, that are emerging out of the Cape Town crisis, are coming back to haunt them in the third part of the year. So even if they manage to hold themselves together in this first quarter of the year and not have too much of an effect from the crisis that's happening, that's what comes back to haunt them in the third quarter. It's become apparent that there's lots of secrets and the usual political shenanigans happening in that party as well, and maybe some of that is coming to the surface, and there looks like lots of purging going on. One of the themes for the DA as the year proceeds is lots of purging going on and getting rid of people who cause all the trouble. That might be their efforts to maintain integrity. What really, at this point, makes them different from the ANC is their willingness to address and eliminate those leaders that are causing trouble, those politicians amongst their own that are the source of their problems. And if they continue in that regard, then they've got something to look forward to. They can actually improve their standing by the end of the year just a little bit. But nevertheless, a crunch time for the DA again in the third quarter as old things come back to haunt them. The third quarter is also when lots of mass action will happen, especially with regards to mining and perhaps someone connected to mining in the government, and possibly also connected to police issues. Perhaps Fikile Mbulala, the police minister, might be a bit of a change in that ministry as well, or some positive action taken by him or whoever the Minister of Police is at that point, trying to improve the situation, perhaps in response to the mass action. As uncomfortable as it all is, it actually improves the situation by making the police services address matters more clearly. But there are lots of wheelings and dealings going on in the third quarter that we'll only see in the fourth quarter. And the last quarter of the year does look like things are beginning to uptick a little bit for everyone. People are feeling more optimistic despite the fact that the world isn't. In a world of confusion and chaos and uncertainty, South Africans will be looking forward to significant political changes in 2019. We will still be managing to work with a strong and somewhat stable economy. Our currency will still be stronger than we expect it to be. So all of that will help us feel a little bit more optimistic. But of course, the optimism is really coming from the incipient 2019 elections, where we see a much better distribution of power. And that's a lot of what's been happening this year. With the breakdown of the power of the ANC, with the breakdown of the relative power of the DA as a party in opposition, a redefinition of the political landscape is the major theme politically for 2018, and we'll see a lot of that by the end of the year, as the DA will have been through its ruptures and shenanigans, and so will the ANC have been through its ruptures and shenanigans. Both parties will have experienced major changes at the level of leadership, but the ANC is beginning to see signs of positive change and development, something not so clear for the DA, who continue to labour under planetary cycles that represent vagueness and confusion, or just lack of clarity, idealism but not reality. And a lot of that comes from the chart of Maimane, the leader, who is somewhat idealistic and loves to give a great speech and loves to complain about the ANC, but doesn't actually do constructive and positive things, which is very much a feature of how DA leadership tends to work at the moment, and what their struggle has been about. So that's probably a lot of what we're going to be seeing the results of, as things look more favourable for the ruling party than the opposition in the last part of the year. And they're going to have to work really hard, that opposition, if they want any positive result in 2019. There are some surprising policy developments. It's a favourite trick of the ANC. Zuma did it and Ramaphosa did it in December of last year. Zuma suddenly announcing free university, and Ramaphosa suddenly announcing redistribution of land, changes in those policies. So it looks like part of the ANC strategy, which is essentially a populist strategy, as we know, kind of stolen from the EFF, is going to be back on the cards, and they're going to be doing more of that at the end of the year in the efforts to tip things in their favour, to tip everything in their favour. So looks like a very exciting December we have coming for us, with the increasing optimism. Hopefully people will understand that all the political talk is, of course, just politics ahead of 2019. But I suspect we are going to end this year having seen more drama and a lot of change and confusion and uncertainty, but with a lot of optimism about what we have to look forward to in 2019. We are surviving, and we are surviving strong. South Africa still stands. See you for the year ahead in 2019. But of course, we've got lots to talk about before we get to 2019. Firstly, join me next week when we look at the year ahead for you and your star sign. Let's get personal about it. And I'll be telling you some of what you can find in my book, but you can still go and get that for yourself. We've also got a great giveaway next week where I'm going to be giving away a couple of copies of this book. So make sure you watch next week's show and you join us for the giveaway. We've got some great shows ahead of you for 2019. It is going to be a great one. See you next week for your stars.